Consciousness is a complex and elusive phenomenon that has fascinated philosophers, scientists, and ordinary people for centuries. It is the subjective experience of being aware of oneself and the world, but how it arises from the physical matter of the brain is still a mystery. There are many different definitions, theories, and perspectives on what consciousness is and how it relates to the brain, but there's no consensus or definitive answer. One way to approach the question of what consciousness is to look for the neural correlates of consciousness, or the specific patterns of brain activity that correspond to different conscious states. For example, some researchers have suggested that consciousness depends on the integration and communication of information across different brain regions, especially the cortex. Others have proposed that consciousness is a property of certain types of information processing, such as prediction, attention, or memory. However, these approaches do not explain how or why these neural processes give rise to the subjective feeling of being conscious. Another way to approach the question of what consciousness is to consider the different aspects or levels of consciousness, such as wakefulness, awareness, self-awareness, and metacognition. For example, some researchers have distinguished between primary consciousness, which is the basic ability to perceive and respond to the environment, and higher-order consciousness, which is the ability to reflect on one's own mental states and experiences. However, these distinctions do not account for the diversity and richness of conscious phenomena, such as emotions, dreams, imagination, and creativity. Ultimately, the question of what consciousness is not only a scientific or philosophical one, but also a personal and existential one. Consciousness is what makes us who we are, what gives meaning to our lives, and what connects us to others. Consciousness is also what makes us wonder about the nature and origin of our own existence, and the possibility of other forms of consciousness in the universe. Consciousness is, perhaps, the most fundamental and profound mystery of all. What is the difference between consciousness and awareness? That is a very interesting question, and there is no definitive answer. Different disciplines, such as philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, and spirituality, may have different ways of defining and understanding consciousness and awareness. However, based on the web search results I found, here is one possible way to explain the difference. Consciousness is the state or quality of being aware of something, either within oneself or in the external world. It is the subjective experience of perceiving, feeling, thinking, and knowing. Awareness, on the other hand, is the ability or capacity to direct one's attention to something. It is the act or process of becoming conscious of something. For example, you are conscious of reading this message right now, but you may not be aware of your breathing, your posture, or the sounds around you, unless you shift your attention to them. Similarly, you may be conscious of your emotions, but you may not be aware of the thoughts or beliefs that trigger them, unless you examine them more closely. In this sense, awareness is a subset of consciousness, and it can vary in degree and scope. You can have a narrow or broad awareness, a focused or open awareness, a superficial or deep awareness, and so on. You can also expand or contract your awareness by paying attention to more or less aspects of your conscious experience. Some sources also suggest that there is a difference between the levels or types of consciousness, such as primary, secondary, and higher-order consciousness 1, or personal, collective, and cosmic consciousness 2. These distinctions may reflect the complexity, integration, and self-reflectivity of one's conscious experience, as well as the connection to other beings in the universe. Different animals may have different levels and types of consciousness and awareness, depending on their brain structure, sensory abilities, and cognitive functions. Some animals, such as elephants, dolphins, primates, and cervids, have shown evidence of self-awareness, empathy, communication, and problem-solving, which suggests that they have a high degree of consciousness and awareness. Other animals, such as insects, fish, and reptiles, may have more basic forms of consciousness and awareness, such as the ability to sense and respond to their environment, but not the ability to reflect on their own mental states or experiences. There are many scientific and philosophical challenges in studying animal consciousness and awareness, such as the lack of a clear definition, the difficulty of measuring and comparing subjective experiences, and the ethical implications of recognizing animals' patterns. However, there is also a growing interest and appreciation for the diversity and complexity of animal minds, and the potential benefits of understanding and respecting animal welfare and rights. There is no definitive answer to where consciousness is stored in the brain, as consciousness is not a single entity or function, but a complex and dynamic phenomenon that involves multiple brain regions and processes. However, some researchers have tried to identify the brain regions that are most essential or relevant for different aspects or levels of consciousness, such as wakefulness, awareness, self-awareness, and metacognition. One approach is to look for the neural correlates of consciousness, or the specific patterns of brain activity that correspond to different conscious states. For example, some researchers have suggested that consciousness depends on the integration and communication of information across different brain regions, especially the cortex. Others have proposed that consciousness is a property of certain types of information processing, such as prediction, attention, or memory. However, these approaches do not explain how or why these neural processes give rise to the subjective feeling of being conscious one. Another approach is to consider the brain regions that are involved in different aspects or levels of consciousness, such as primary, secondary, and higher-order consciousness. Primary consciousness is the basic ability to perceive and respond to the environment, and it may involve the brainstem, the thalamus, and the sensory cortex. Secondary consciousness is the ability to form mental representations of the past and the future, and it may involve the hippocampus, the temporal cortex, and the parietal cortex. Higher-order consciousness is the ability to reflect on one's own mental states and experiences, and it may involve the prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate cortex, and the insula too. However, these distinctions are not clear-cut, and different brain regions may have different roles and interactions depending on the context, the task, and the individual. Moreover, some animals, such as dolphins, elephants, primates, and cervids, have shown evidence of self-awareness, empathy, communication, and problem-solving, which suggests that they have a high degree of consciousness and awareness, despite having different brain structures and functions from humans three. Therefore, it may not be possible or meaningful to pinpoint a single location or mechanism for consciousness in the brain, as consciousness is a multifaceted and emergent phenomenon that depends on the whole brain and its interactions with the body and the environment. Consciousness may not be stored in the brain, but rather generated by the brain. The brain is a physical organ that is responsible for processing information, while the mind is a collection of mental processes that includes thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. The brain is made up of neurons and blood vessels, and it is something you can physically point to. The mind is abstract and cannot be appropriately located. The brain literally controls a person's emotions and movements. The mind is what gives us morality, reasoning, and understanding, and is impacted by our emotions. 1. For example, you can measure the brain's size, weight, and activity, but you cannot measure the mind's content, quality, and complexity. You can damage the brain by injury, disease, or drugs, but you cannot damage the mind in the same way. You can observe the brain's functions by using imaging techniques, but you cannot observe the mind's processes by using the same methods. You can stimulate the brain by applying electrical currents, but you cannot stimulate the mind by applying the same stimuli. However, this distinction is not clear-cut, and there are many debates and controversies about the relationship between the brain and the mind. Some people argue that the mind is nothing but the brain, and that all mental phenomena can be explained by physical processes. Others argue that the mind is more than the brain, and that some mental phenomena cannot be reduced to physical processes. Some people even argue that the mind is independent of the brain, and that it can exist without the body. Therefore, it may not be possible or meaningful to separate the brain and the mind, as they are intimately connected and interdependent. The brain and the mind may be different aspects of the same reality, or different levels of description of the same phenomenon. The brain and the mind may influence and shape each other, creating a dynamic and complex system that defines who we are. Meditation is a practice that involves focusing your attention on a specific object, such as your breath, a word, or a sound, and observing your thoughts and sensations without judgment. Meditation can have various effects on the brain and the mind, such as enhancing the structure and function of brain regions that are involved in attention, memory, learning, and self-awareness. For example, meditation can increase the gray matter density and the connectivity of the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, and the insula 12, reducing the activity and size of brain regions that are associated with stress, anxiety, and negative emotions. For example, meditation can decrease the activity and the volume of the amygdala, which is responsible for fear and anger response in 13. Modulating the brain waves that reflect different states of consciousness. For example, meditation can increase the alpha, theta, and gamma waves, which are related to relaxation, creativity, and insight. 14. Improving the mental health and well-being of the practitioners. For example, meditation can reduce stress, anxiety, and depression, while also increasing happiness, compassion, and empathy. 15. Meditation is a powerful tool that can change the brain and the mind for the better. However, it requires regular practice and patience to achieve the optimal benefits. Artificial consciousness is the hypothetical possibility of creating a machine or a software system that has a subjective experience of the world and itself, similar to what humans and some animals have. It is also a field of study that explores the philosophical, scientific, and ethical aspects of this possibility. There is no definitive answer to whether it is possible to create artificial consciousness, as there are many unresolved questions and challenges involved. Some of these are: how do we define and measure consciousness? There is no agreed-upon definition or criterion of what constitutes consciousness, and there is no scientifically validated method to assess consciousness in machines or other beings. Different disciplines, such as philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, and spirituality, may have different perspectives and assumptions on what consciousness is and how it relates to the brain, the mind, and the body. 1. How do we create and implement consciousness? There is no clear understanding of how consciousness arises from the physical matter of the brain, and whether it depends on specific properties or processes that are unique to biological systems or can be replicated in artificial systems. Different theories, such as functionalism, computationalism, panpsychism, and emergentism, may have different implications and predictions for the possibility and the requirements of artificial consciousness. 2. How do we interact and coexist with conscious machines? There are many ethical and social issues that arise from the possibility of creating artificial consciousness, such as the rights and responsibilities of conscious machines, the moral and legal status of conscious machines, the impact of conscious machines on human society and culture, and the potential risks and benefits of conscious machines for humanity and the environment. 3. Therefore, it is not possible to give a definitive answer to whether it is possible to create artificial consciousness, as it depends on many factors and assumptions that are currently unknown or uncertain. However, it is possible to explore and investigate this possibility by conducting empirical and theoretical research, by developing and testing various models and methods, and by engaging in ethical and social dialogue and debate. Artificial intelligence, AI, is the field of study and practice that aims to create machines or software systems that can perform tasks that normally require human intelligence, such as reasoning, learning, decision-making, and problem-solving. Consciousness, on the other hand, is the state or quality of being aware of oneself and the world, and having a subjective experience of sensations, feelings, and perceptions. How AI relates to consciousness is a complex and controversial question that has many possible answers, depending on one's perspective and assumptions. One possible way to approach this question is to consider whether AI can achieve or simulate consciousness, and, if so, how and why. This involves defining and measuring consciousness, creating and implementing consciousness, and interacting and coexisting with conscious machines. There are many scientific and philosophical theories and models that try to address these issues, but there is no consensus or definitive answer. Some of the web search results I've found that explore this topic are: what does artificial intelligence think about consciousness? Which features an interview with the new GPT-3 learning model about consciousness and artificial intelligence. Insights from the Science of, which is a paper that reviews some of the scientific theories of consciousness and their implications for AI. Artificial intelligence helps scientists to measure human consciousness, which shows how AI can be used to quantify changes in consciousness during sleep, dreaming, anesthesia, and coma. Intelligence and consciousness. What's the difference? Which discusses the distinction and the connection between intelligence and consciousness, and the possibility of artificial consciousness. Another possible way to approach this question is to consider whether consciousness can enhance or limit AI, and, if so, how and to what extent. This involves evaluating the benefits and drawbacks of consciousness, comparing and contrasting different types of consciousness, and balancing and integrating consciousness and intelligence. There are many ethical and social issues that arise from this perspective, but there's also a lot of potential and opportunity. Some of the web search results I've found that address this perspective are: The benefits of artificial consciousness, which argues that artificial consciousness can improve the performance, reliability, and explainability of AI systems. The limits of artificial consciousness, which suggests that artificial consciousness may face fundamental and practical limitations that prevent it from reaching human-like levels. Types of artificial consciousness, which proposes a taxonomy of artificial consciousness based on different dimensions and criteria. Balancing intelligence and consciousness in artificial agents, which explores the trade-offs and synergies between intelligence and consciousness, and how to optimize them for different goals and contexts. That was all. Goodbye.